Larry!
Larry, you can't just... Oh,
Larry! Oh, are you all right? How did... Larry!
Critical hits. Some people see them as the bane of their existence. Others find them to be an excellent tool in gaming. Not just a tool, but a means of furthering the story, a means of increasing the stakes, a means of creating more adventure, more problems to overcome. I happen to fall in the latter category, and today I'd like to talk to you about why you shouldn't be afraid of critical hits or of character death. Now, critical hits have been around forever, and they range from anything from double damage to maybe a d6 roll to determine if anything additional has happened, simple GM fiat, and percentage charts. With 1 to 100, this could happen on a critical hit. They range all over the board. There are critical hit cards, critical hit dice, many critical hit charts, and some of them are very cruel. Some of them are very lenient. Some of them are right down the middle. When you're dealing with critical hits, you want to kind of find your level of severity that you're okay with and that the players at your table are okay with. But I'd like to discuss a couple different levels of severity and give you a few examples. And as usual, we're going to put something in the description below, a link for you to click on to get some game resources from us here at Fudge and Dice. For starters, the most typical type of critical hit is simply double your weapon damage. Sometimes this will include your modifiers, sometimes not. That's kind of up to the game and up to the table, and up to the rules that everyone has agreed to abide by. But you just add an extra die. What I found the problem with that particular type of critical hit is primarily the fact that when you roll double ones, you roll a critical hit and you roll double ones on your damage dice, that's pretty disappointing. It kind of makes you feel like you got nothing for your effort. So what I like to do if you are adhering to strictly double damage dice, what I prefer to do is give maximum damage on the first die rolled, then roll the second damage die, add that to the maximum, and proceed from there. At least that will always guaranteed feel like it's a critical hit. Another option is to add in a special effect, something else that happens in addition to that double damage. Maybe roll a d6, and on a roll of 4 to 6, something additional comes along, like perhaps you disarm your opponent. Maybe you knock them down, knock them prone. Maybe you shove them down a flight of stairs or off a bridge. Maybe you damage their armor, or knock a flyer out of the air. All these things are kind of up to the DM in this type of system. I once played with a DM who ran a percentage-based critical system, where if you rolled 1 to 50%, it was simply double damage. If you rolled 51 to 75%, it was triple damage. Beyond that was 4 times damage, and if you rolled 100% double zeros on the d10s, that was an instant kill. No matter what you were fighting, dead. That same DM later on down the line decided he was going to bring out his old Merc books, his old Middle-earth role-playing books, simply for their critical hit tables, and apply them to D&D. Now, I don't know how familiar anybody is with these, but those were extra brutal. And they would do a certain amount of hits, which would be a certain amount of additional damage, as well as some kind of nasty side effect. The only critical hit system I've discovered that's even come close to the brutality of the MERP critical hit table is the 2nd edition Combat and Tactics critical hits that we'll discuss in just a little bit. One critical hit system that we discovered well past the 3rd edition phase. I believe we were going into Pathfinder 1st edition around this time, and we discovered these critical hit cards, and I believe they were produced by Paizo themselves. And they were excellent. Nord Games currently produces very excellent critical hit cards that are available. But I'm going to round off this video by discussing my favorite, and I think a lot of people's least favorite critical hit system. I remember the critical hit charts from the 2nd edition Combat and Tactics, the player's option books. If anyone remembers those, there was a series of 3. You had Skills and Powers, which kind of defined your race and your character class. Combat and Tactics gave you new options for combat and introduced weapon mastery and these terrible critical hit charts. And Spells and Magic, and again, give you more class options for spellcasters and new spells, and introduced some truly hideous critical hit charts for spells. But I wanted to start with the Combat and Tactics critical hits, which is bludgeoning, piercing, slashing weapons. The way this worked was, depending on your size versus the creature you are hitting, you would do much more, or have a much larger critical die to determine the severity of the hit. It also depended on your weapon mastery and things of that nature. Yeah, if you were getting hit by a giant, good luck. This bludgeoning versus humanoids truly reminds me of the story of Gordy Goodfellow, and it was quite an unfortunate end. Gordy was a halfling rogue, or thief at the time. They were called thieves in 2nd edition. And he had an unfortunate run-in with I believe it was an iron golem. That iron golem had a really big hammer, and Gordy was a really small fellow. 2nd edition, it took you some time to get to, I think he was 11th level at the time. It took you quite some time to get there. And all of that was removed with a single swing of a hammer. Gordy became flat as a pancake and just utterly destroyed, utterly annihilated. His hit points were erased from max hit points. He went into more than double negative. And for fun, we rolled on the charts, and we determined that I believe he got this one: torso crushed, victim killed. And he was just unsalvageable. But Gordy's a great fellow. He had a great career. That was a great character to play, and that's a character I will go into in more detail in later stories. But for now, I wanted to focus on critical hits. That was just one example of things that happened with these particular critical hit charts. But there's also some other cool stories, right? I had a character named Xander who was a fighter cleric. He began a fighter and found faith on his travels, on his journeys, and which ultimately led him on his course to face this villain who was threatening the countryside, as villains do. And Xander, very devout fellow by that time, and very determined. And he actually had a great character death, which he inflicted upon himself, and I'll explain. Through critical hits. This enemy he was fighting had some psionic abilities. So the group was very, very close to a total party kill. The entire group was down. Xander was the last one standing, and he was barely standing because this villain we were fighting had cast a spell that delivers as much damage as you inflict upon him back at the attacker. So every time we would hit this guy, we would be receiving the same amount of damage. And by this time, Xander knew this. He was out of spells. He was almost dead. The rest of the party was on the ground. Some of them stabilized, some of them not. But Xander also had this ring of telekinesis, which would often come in handy, but it came in very handy at this point in time, because this fellow had him magically pinned. Xander could not move. He had been disarmed. His weapon fell from his hand, which was a bastard sword. And Xander had, I believe, 8 hit points left. And at that time, he decided, why not? He used his ring of telekinesis, lifted his own bastard sword, made it fly at the villain, and critical hit. Struck him right in the chest, killed the villain flat out, but it also killed Xander. And he knew that was a possibility. He knew that was a probability. And that was a really cool character death. And that's one of the reasons why I tell people, don't be afraid of character death. Don't be afraid of critical hits.
I'm gonna rip you in half now.
You might not want to go, this to certain extremes with critical hits, and that's, of course, up to you and up to your table. Don't be afraid of it. I wouldn't have gotten nearly as much out of D&D throughout the years without some of those very memorable, and yes, some very comical, and some disappointing character deaths. So I would totally encourage anyone to go back to some of these 2nd edition books. Go back to the Middle-earth role-playing system, check out their critical hit charts. There are several varieties of critical hit cards and critical hit dice and other available resources on Amazon and drive-through-RPG. Check them out. Even check out, just do a search online. You'll have plenty of critical hit charts come up that people have made themselves. And of course, I'm going to put some of my own down at the link in the description below for you to check out and download for free. Think about all the stories you've enjoyed throughout your life coming up. All the epic tales of adventure, the fantasy, the sci-fi, anything that you've really come to enjoy. And you'll find usually one of the most common denominators is a hero that's flawed, and a hero that takes a beating but gets back up and keeps on coming. And I think critical hits are kind of vital to represent that aspect of a hero. When your character goes down, but you know in your heart that there's probably a 99% chance he's going to be getting right back up, or she's going to be getting right back up, it kind of takes the fun out of the adventure, doesn't it? Doesn't it kind of spoil the stakes? There are no stakes. If your character's 100% going to survive, and any disadvantages or disabilities are very quickly overcome, the problems are very quickly solved. I don't know about you, but for me, it's not very thrilling. It's not very fun, really. I like to have consequences. I like to have brutal battles that I don't know if I'm going to walk away from. And when I do walk away from them, those are stories that we tell each other for years and years. You'll tell people who don't even game about these stories of this character that you had once that accomplished A, B, C, and D when he really had no business doing so. And he should have been crushed, but persevered, came through, and it's just another heroic story. And heroic stories cannot exist without danger, without peril, without stakes, without the possibility of the hero failing. Nobody wants to be a failure, but none of us play these games to be bored either, do we? Thanks for joining us. As always, if you found anything of value here, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and spread the word around. Let people know about Fudge and Dice. Hit that comment section below. Let me know what you think about the free game resources provided. Let me know what you think about critical hits, and tell me any stories you have of how critical hits might have improved your game, or made for some fantastic stories, or made your game miserable. You keep rolling them straight. And until next time, may the dice forever roll in your favor.